A Tale of Werewolves, Alphas, and Fated Destinies, written by Olivia Stone. The full moon hung above the stone temple like a cold and merciless judge, its pale light spilling down the carved pillars and pooling on the floor where I knelt, my wrists bound in runic chains that bit into my skin with every tiny movement, sending trickles of pain that I tried to ignore. Because the real agony wasn't physical at all. It was the suffocating knowledge that my life was no longer mine, that my future was being carved by hands that sought only to take and twist until nothing of me remained. And maybe you think I am being dramatic, but try kneeling in a sacred hall where the very stones have absorbed centuries of forced vows, broken wills, and unwilling magic. And tell me your pulse wouldn't be beating out a frantic rhythm too. The chanting of the priests echoed around me, low and rhythmic, the kind of sound that seeps into your bones whether you want it there or not, and each syllable made the runes etched around the temple glow, like molten silver, brighter and brighter, as if the moon itself were sinking from the sky and settling around us, thick and heavy and oppressive. And I remember thinking that this was what drowning must feel like, except instead of water, it was destiny closing over my head, a destiny chosen by others, by Lord Vasker Runeclaw, who stood before me in ceremonial armor, his sharp smile carved with the confidence of someone who believed he could bend the world to his will. Vasker's gaze slid over me like I was nothing more than a tool, a vessel for his ambitions, and when he reached down to tilt my chin upward with the cold edge of a gauntleted finger, his touch made my stomach twist. Not with fear exactly, but with the kind of revulsion that makes you want to peel your own skin off just to feel clean again. "You should be honored, Lyria," he murmured, his voice smooth but hollow, like a blade wrapped in silk. "For few are chosen for a moon bond, and none as worthy as you, though you do not yet understand the gift I offer." A gift, he called it, as if stripping me of my will and binding my magic to his greed was some kind of blessing. But I kept my voice silent because the priestess, High Priestess Selentra, who believed she spoke for the moon itself, had warned me that a single interruption, a single act of defiance, would result in punishment so severe even the runes themselves would remember it. The chains around my wrists tightened, responding to the chant as if they could sense my rising panic, and a bright spike of pain shot through me, making my breath hitch, but I didn't cry out. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction, though inside I felt something fraying, a thread stretched so thin that one more pull might snap it entirely. Selentra stepped closer, her robes whispering against the floor like wind through dead leaves, and her eyes, cold, ancient things, looked upon me with the kind of distant amusement reserved for animals too foolish to know they were already trapped, and she lifted a ceremonial blade, its edge glowing with pale enchantment. "Bring forth the vessel," she commanded, her voice carrying through the hall with chilling authority, and 2 guards moved behind me, their hands firm on my shoulders, forcing me upright, exposing my throat to the blade as if this were all a simple, inevitable process, like grinding wheat or lighting a fire. But in that moment, something inside me, something small and desperate and utterly unwilling to die quietly, snapped. Maybe it was instinct, maybe fate, maybe the lingering spark of my family's defiant legacy, or maybe it was just raw, frantic survival. But as Selentra raised the knife, ready to begin the moonbond ritual that would chain my life to Vasker's forever, I did something absurdly simple, yet dangerously brilliant. I slumped forward. My body went limp, my eyes rolled back, and I forced a violent, rasping gasp from my throat knowing exactly what an allergic reaction looked like because I had studied herbs my whole life, and this temple's incense, heavy and aromatic, made the perfect scapegoat. My chest, I gasped, twisting just enough for the chains to clink. I can't breathe. The panic in the priest's voices sliced through the rhythmic chant, breaking its momentum, and several rushed toward me in alarm, trying to deduce whether the moon's blessing was taking hold improperly, or whether the vessel, me, was physically failing, which would render the entire ritual void and deeply inauspicious. Confusion broke the ritual's focus like a cracked mirror, and that was all I needed. With a twist just so, I managed to yank one wrist free enough to loosen the runic chain's grip, the metal shifting because the chant had faltered, weakening the binding enchantment. And before anyone could realize what was happening, I bolted. I don't remember exactly how I got out of that temple. Only flashes of motion, the cold slap of night air, the shouts behind me, the pounding in my skull. But I remember running through the woods like a hunted animal, branches scratching my skin, the moonlight flickering between leaves like 1,000 panicked eyes. And I ran and ran because stopping meant death or worse. And sometimes worse is real. And sometimes you can know it's real because you can feel it breathing down your neck. The forest was alive with pursuit. Guards crashing through undergrowth, enchantment wards flaring in the dark, the distant drums of the ritual shifting into a warning rhythm. But luck, or destiny, or some twisted cosmic joke guided my staggering steps down a steep incline, where I hit the ground hard, rolled through brambles, and stumbled into a small clearing illuminated only by moonlight. That's when I saw him. A man, cloaked and hooded, standing alone at the edge of the clearing, his posture relaxed yet alert, as if he were part of the forest itself and had been waiting, watching, measuring the night for its secrets. Silver hair spilled from beneath his hood, catching the moonlight in a metallic shimmer, and for a heartbeat, I thought I was hallucinating, that the moon had shaped itself into a man just to mock me. But then he turned his head toward me with the kind of sharp, predatory grace you see only in wolves or warriors who've lived too long in the wild. His eyes gleamed, gold, alive, dangerous, but I couldn't stop, not when shouts echoed behind me, growing louder, crashing closer, and something inside me, that thin thread which had snapped earlier, now twisted itself into a reckless, desperate impulse, the kind that could either save a life or ruin it. I ran straight at him. He stiffened, clearly surprised, and I could see the moment he realized I wasn't slowing down, and you might think he would step aside, let a crazed runaway girl crash past him. But he didn't move, not even a fraction. He simply watched me with a strange, assessing stillness, as if he were trying to understand why this wild-looking stranger with torn wrists and fear in her eyes was barreling toward him like he was salvation itself. Maybe he sensed the guards approaching. Maybe he sensed me. Maybe fate tugged at him too. Because when I reached him, when my trembling hands grabbed his cloak, clutching the first living being I could reach, I felt something, a spark, a pulse, a current, leap between us like lightning made of moonlight and heat, and something older than either of us could name. The ancient runaway rite ignited, and the world exploded. A surge of lunar energy blasted outward from the point where my fingers curled into his cloak, swirling around us like a spiraling halo, lighting the clearing with blinding silver radiance, and I felt the bond, the accidental, desperate bond, latch onto him with the same determination I had used to escape my fate. He inhaled sharply, staggering a step, his golden eyes widening with a mixture of shock and something almost primal. By the spirits, he muttered, voice low and rough, but the bond sealed before he could finish. Threads of moonlight weaving between us, stitching fate to fear and power to panic, binding us tighter with every breath I took. This ritual should have been weak, a loophole, a simple placeholder bond meant to invalidate my forced marriage. But it wasn't weak at all. It was overwhelming. It was consuming. It was as if the moon recognized him, as if it had been waiting for him. The radiance dimmed slowly, leaving us standing in the clearing, my hands still clutching his cloak, his breath warm against my forehead, my pulse thunderous in my ears. Then we heard the guards. "Over here! She can't have gone far!" He didn't ask who I was. He didn't demand answers. He simply stepped in front of me, placing himself between me and the approaching voices, and something in his stance shifted. A subtle, dangerous change, like a blade leaving its sheath. His silver hair lifted in the breeze. His eyes blazed with molten gold, and the air trembled as if recognizing a king. The guards burst into the clearing, but when they saw him, when they saw the aura radiating from him like a rising storm, they froze, their knees buckling as if the weight of his presence alone forced them downward. A soft growl rumbled from his chest, not fully human, not fully wolf, something powerful and ancient, layered with authority I didn't yet understand. "Leave," he commanded, his voice echoing with a resonance that made even the trees seem to shiver, and the guards scrambled away in terror, as if fleeing from a nightmare they had no name for. Only when the forest fell silent did he turn back to me. And it was then, when the moonlight framed his sharp jaw, when his silver hair flowed like liquid frost, when his gold eyes studied me with that unnerving intensity, that I realized I had bonded myself to someone far, far beyond my understanding. He stared at me, breathing hard, as if struggling against something inside himself. "What did you do?" he asked softly, though beneath the softness was a tension like a bowstring pulled too tight. "What kind of bond was that?" I swallowed, my throat dry as old parchment. "A runaway rite," I whispered, ashamed of how small my voice sounded. I didn't know what else to do." He exhaled, slow and controlled, but his eyes flicked to the fading traces of magic between us, and something like fear, or maybe awe, flickered there. "That wasn't a simple runaway rite," he said, voice low. "That was something else entirely." The clearing felt suddenly too quiet, too still, too expectant. Then he stepped closer, lowering his hood, revealing the full cascade of his silver hair and the sharp lines of a face carved by hardship and authority. And when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made my heart slam against my ribs. "My name is Kaelin," he said, and the forest itself seemed to lean in, listening. Kaelin Dravenhart. The name meant nothing to me, at least not yet, but the way he watched my reaction, the way he seemed to brace himself for the moment I understood, told me everything. He wasn't just a traveler. He wasn't just a powerful stranger. Something shifted inside me, a pulse, a recognition, an instinct I didn't know I possessed. And fear mingled with something dangerously like curiosity. Who are you?" I whispered. Kaelin's golden gaze held mine, unwavering, steady, unbearably intense. "I am the Alpha King." The world tilted, the bond thrummed, and my fate, already torn from my hands once, spiraled into something far larger, far more dangerous than anything I could have imagined. The moon above us glowed brighter, as if amused, and somewhere in the forest, a long, haunting howl rose, echoing through the night, welcoming the moment destiny shifted course. I didn't know it then, but that single moment, that accidental bond, that desperate leap, had set into motion a chain of events that would change not only my life, but the fate of every clan, every court, every creature that lived under the moon's cold eye. And as Kaelin reached toward me, as if sensing the bond pulling us together again, I felt a tremor of something unbearably real flicker in the space between us. Because if I didn't find a way to control this bond, it would control me. And worse, it would destroy him. If you have ever woken up on a morning when the world no longer resembles anything you once understood, when every breath feels strangely borrowed and every heartbeat skips against a rhythm that is not entirely your own, then you will understand what it was like for me in the moments after Kaelin Dravenhart, the man I had unknowingly bonded myself to, revealed that he was not merely strong or mysterious or unusually commanding, but was, in fact, the Alpha King, the ruler of all Werkin clans, the one whose authority stretched across forests, mountains, and territories far beyond the boundaries of my old, sheltered life. And I swear that for one trembling instant, I forgot how to speak, breathe, or exist inside my own skin. The clearing, moments earlier charged with the energy of a bond I barely comprehended, suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too intimate for the enormity of what he had told me. And even the silver light of the moon seemed to pull back, as if giving us space to grapple with the consequences of a decision made in pure, terrified instinct, rather than wisdom or foresight. And I could feel the tremors of that choice echoing through my veins like disrupted magic seeking a place to settle. Kaelin watched me with a patience that felt almost unnatural, his golden eyes simmering with a tension he tried to mask beneath calm words. But his voice carried an undertone of gravel, like a riverbed stirred by a storm, and though he stood perfectly still, there was something coiled in him, something ancient, powerful, instinctive, that reacted to me with an intensity I didn't yet understand. "You should sit," he said slowly, not commanding, not ordering, but offering. And even so, his voice vibrated with the kind of authority that was difficult to ignore, the kind that made the air shift around him, the kind that whispered of legends and battles and destinies shaped by blood and power. "I'm not staying with you," I blurted, though the words stumbled out of my throat in a tangled mess, neither steady nor confident, more like a reflexive gasp from a girl who had just watched her life twist sharply into unfamiliar territory. Kaelin didn't flinch, didn't scowl, didn't lecture me with the arrogance one might expect from a king. He simply tilted his head, narrowing his gaze with the kind of deep, assessing focus that made me feel as though he were seeing things within me I had never dared examine myself. And when he finally spoke, his voice came low and steady, like warm thunder rolling through the forest. "You may not wish to stay," he said, "but the bond will not allow us to separate for long. And if you run again, if you tear yourself from me without understanding the consequences, it will hurt you more than it will hurt me." "The bond," I echoed, my voice thin, stretched, almost breaking, because that single word carried too much weight, too much implication, and my mind reeled under the notion that a ritual meant only to protect me from one monster had instead bound me to a man who carried the full weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. Kaelin took a step closer, slow, careful, his movements fluid but controlled, as if he were trying not to startle a skittish animal. And when his silver hair caught the moonlight, shimmering like strands of starlight spun into silk, I felt myself instinctively inch back, even as the strange, invisible pull of the bond urged me to remain where I was. "You don't understand what you invoked," he said, and though the words were firm, there was no mockery in them, no belittlement, only a grave sincerity that made my stomach twist with dread. "The runaway right is old magic, forgotten by many, outlawed by some, feared by others, and it can only bind you to someone your essence recognizes as capable of defending you from the threat you flee." "I grabbed the first man I saw," I whispered, my voice a raw confession. "How could my essence know anything about you?" Kalen's expression darkened, not with anger, but with something like recognition tinged with reluctance, as though he had been hoping I wouldn't ask that question, as though the answer was something he wasn't ready to burden me with. "That," he said quietly, "is what we must discover." Before I could respond, before I could demand answers or argue or collapse beneath the weight of confusion pressing against my ribs, we heard a distant sound, faint but sharp, like steel striking bark or boots breaking twigs, and Kalen's entire demeanor changed instantly, shifting from thoughtful to alert, from contemplative to deadly. His head snapped toward the forest's edge, golden eyes narrowing, nostrils flaring slightly as though he were catching a scent carried on the wind, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped into a tone that vibrated with danger. "They're not far," he murmured. "Your captors, and they're not alone." My heart lurched, cold and frantic, and every instinct screamed at me to run, hide, fight, disappear into the shadows like I had done all my life. But before I could even form the thought of fleeing, Kalen placed a hand on my arm, lightly, barely a touch at all. Yet the bond reacted with such forceful warmth that my knees almost buckled beneath me. "You're safe beside me," he said, and the bond thrummed in. Agreement, a pulse of energy that rolled through my veins like warm fire, though my mind rebelled against the implication, questioning how safety could exist so close to a man whose very presence felt like a storm restrained by thin threads. The footsteps grew louder, voices closer. A low growl rumbled from Kalen's chest. Not human, not tame, not anything I had heard before. Deep and resonant, like a warning meant not only for the intruders, but for the entire forest. "Stay behind me," he said. And this time, the command in his voice left no room for argument. Men burst into the clearing. Vasker's scouts, armored, armed, eyes wild with fury and desperation, and they froze when they saw Kalen standing before me like a shadow wrapped in moonlight, his silver hair drifting in the air, his aura swelling with impossible intensity. One of them gasped. Another stumbled backward. Because they recognized him. Or rather, they recognized the alpha power rolling off him in palpable waves, the kind of power that could command an entire army with a tilt of the head, the kind of power that demanded respect whether they wished to give it or not. "Alpha!" One of them choked, falling to one knee. Kalen's voice cut through the clearing like a blade of cold lightning. "You were hunting someone under my protection," he said, and though the words were calm, the threat woven into them was unmistakable, lethal, absolute. "Explain yourselves." The scout trembled. We were ordered." "By whom?" Kalen demanded, golden eyes glowing bright enough to make the air tremble. "Lord Vasker?" The scout stuttered, bowing low. "And the High Priestess Salentra?" The bond pulsed sharply inside me, a surge of fear and memory, and Kalen's gaze snapped briefly to mine, reading the panic in my expression, seeing the way my breath shortened and my shoulders curled inward, and a flicker of something protective, feral almost, darkened his gaze. He turned back to the kneeling scouts. "You will leave," he said, "and you will not return to these woods." The men scrambled to obey, vanishing into the forest with the terrified haste of prey fleeing a predator. And once the clearing was silent again, Kalen exhaled, the glow in his eyes fading slightly, though his posture remained tense, as if he were waiting for another attack. "Your warlord knows you bonded," he said, turning back to me. "They will come harder next time. Faster. More desperate." I closed my eyes, pressing my palms to my face, overwhelmed by a swell of panic that threatened to spill over the edges of rational thought. Because every direction I turned, danger followed. And now that I had bound myself to the Alpha King, I couldn't even pretend to face this alone. "I ruined your life," I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think." Kalen's hand caught my wrist, not forcefully, not possessively, but grounding, steady, warm. And when I opened my eyes, he was closer than before, his expression softer, though still layered with tension and questions, and some unreadable emotion that shimmered beneath the surface, like something buried beneath deep water. "You didn't ruin anything," he said quietly. "You survived, and now we deal with what came of that." "But the bond can be understood," he said. "Maybe even severed if we find the right ritual, though I can't promise it will be painless or safe." His honesty, stark and unembellished, hit me harder than comfort would have, because it made everything real, solid, inescapable. He dropped his hand, stepping back slightly, as if giving me space to breathe, and for a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence filled only by the whisper of wind through tall grass and the distant call of night birds. At last, Kalen turned toward the trees. "We need to move," he said. "I can't protect you alone if Vasker sends a larger force. We head to Silverwood Valley. My people, my generals. They will help." I hesitated. Following him meant stepping deeper into a world I had never wanted to enter. It meant trusting a man who radiated danger like heat, a man whose presence stirred something inside me both terrifying and strangely magnetic. But what choice did I have? I glanced at the forest behind us, dark and sprawling, filled with threats I could no longer outrun alone. And when Kalen extended his hand, not demanding, not commanding, but offering, I took it. His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure, and the bond hummed softly, like a heartbeat syncing with my own, fragile but persistent. We started walking. He guided me through the trees with a surety born of instinct and experience, moving like a predator who knew every shadow, every shift in the wind, every sound out of place. And I followed him, my senses strained, my emotions stretched thin, my mind torn between fear and something else, something I didn't yet have the courage to name. Hours passed. The night deepened. The forest grew thicker, the air colder, and exhaustion gnawed at my legs. But Kalen pressed on, driven by something invisible, yet unmistakably urgent. And I knew he was right. Stopping anywhere near the temple would have meant death. We paused only once, near a stream where the moonlight pooled in white ribbons along the water's surface. Kalen crouched, letting the cold water run over his hands, and I watched him, noticing for the first time how tired he looked beneath the strength, how the silver of his hair fell over his face like a curtain shielding thoughts he did not want seen. "You feel it too," he murmured suddenly, not looking at me, but staring into the rippling water, as if it had whispered a secret only he could hear. I froze, pulse jumping. "Feel what?" He lifted his gaze, and the intensity in his eyes stole the breath from my lungs. The pull! The bond thrummed sharply, sending a jolt through me so unexpected I stumbled back a step, gripping a tree trunk to steady myself, and Kalen rose to his full height, stepping toward me slowly, cautiously, as though approaching a wild creature that might bolt at any moment. "I don't want this," I whispered, voice cracking under the weight of truth, fear, and something dangerously like longing. "I don't understand it." "I don't want a forced bond either," he said, voice rough. "I've been bound before. It ended in blood." Pain flickered across his expression, a deep, invisible wound, and my breath caught, because for the first time, I saw beyond the Alpha King's power, beyond the commanding presence and fierce aura. I saw a man marked by loss. He stepped closer. I stepped back. The bond tightened. He exhaled sharply, frustration threading through the sound. "This bond will pull us closer whether we want it or not," he said softly. "You must fight it if you wish, but you must also understand it. Running from it will only tear you apart. Tear me apart, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. But the fear in my chest tangled with something else, something warm, confusing, unwelcome, and I hated that he could read it in my eyes. Hated that the bond made every emotion louder, brighter, harder to hide. Before I could speak, before I could demand space or answers or clarity, the ground beneath us shuddered violently, a vicious tremor splitting through the earth like a snarl breaking from a hidden throat. Kalen's head snapped upward. His eyes turned blazing gold. "That's not natural," he growled. "That's a summoning." A second tremor roared through the forest, trees shaking, branches snapping, birds exploding into the air in a frenzy of wings and warning cries. Kalen grabbed my wrist, pulling me close. "Lyria," he began. But he never finished, because the forest ahead of us split open with a blast of sickly green light, and a figure stepped through the swirling haze, tall, cloaked, radiating dark magic thick enough to choke on, and I felt the bond between Kalen and me pulse in agonized warning. Selentra, the high priestess, her voice sliced through the clearing like poison-laced silk. "Found you!" The earth cracked beneath her feet. Kalen shoved me behind him, and the night exploded into chaos. Have you ever stood at the edge of a moment so monumental, so terrifying, so exquisitely fragile, that you feel the entire world holding its breath beside you, as if everything around you, the trees, the moon, the stars, even the trembling air, is waiting for you to make a choice that will either save everyone you love or shatter the one future you never imagined you could have? Because that is exactly how it felt when the night cracked open with High Priestess Selentra's arrival. Her power spilling into the clearing like a monstrous tide of green fire, twisting shadows into claws that scraped across the ground, with a hunger that made my bones ache as Kalen stepped in front of me without hesitation, shielding me with the steady, defiant strength of someone who had lost too much already and would rather die once more than watch another fate be stolen by those who thrived on cruelty. For a heartbeat, a single, trembling, eternal heartbeat, the world seemed to balance on a razor's edge, the bond between Kalen and me pulsing with frantic urgency, urging us closer, urging us to stand together, urging us to fight as one, even though fear churned in my stomach like a living, breathing thing, a creature formed of doubts and shattered memories. But there was no time left for fear, no time to run, no time to unravel beneath the weight of everything we had endured. Because Selentra stepped forward with the cold poise of someone who believed she had already won. "Lyria Veloria," she said, her voice curling through the clearing like frost lacing over glass. You were meant to be a vessel, and yet you dared flee your sacred destiny, dared bind yourself to the Alpha King, dared disrupt the balance the moon ordained. Kaelin growled, low and vicious, a sound that vibrated through the earth beneath my feet, and the gold of his eyes blazed so brightly, I felt the heat of it brush against my skin like fire wrapped in sunlight. But Selentra didn't flinch, didn't cower, didn't break. She simply smiled, that thin, serpentine smile that had tormented my nightmares since childhood. You always believed you were special, she said, turning that cold gaze onto Kaelin. And in a sense you are. But even a king can be broken with the right leverage. And with a sweep of her hand, she hurled a torrent of green light toward us, a force so violent I felt the air tear as it flew. Kaelin lunged forward, shifting partially mid-movement, his hands becoming claws, his teeth sharpening, his muscles rippling beneath skin caught halfway between man and wolf. But before he could intercept the blow, I felt the bond surge. No, erupt, inside me. A tidal wave of silver magic that burst from my chest and wrapped around us in a luminous shield, shimmering like a fragment of the moon carved into a barrier of light. The blast hit. The forest shook. The shield held. Barely. Pain shot through me, a lancing agony that burned down my spine and into my fingertips, and I staggered, gasping as though an invisible hand had squeezed every breath from my lungs. But even as I reeled, even as tears stung my eyes, I felt Kaelin's arm wrap around my waist, steadying me, anchoring me, grounding me with a warmth so fierce it steadied the trembling inside my soul. "Don't push yourself," he murmured, voice strained, breath warm against my temple. "I have to," I whispered, tasting blood from where I'd bitten my tongue. "Because she won't stop until she kills us both." Selentra tilted her head, watching us with the fascinated detachment of a scholar observing an experiment. "Remarkable," she said softly. The bond awakened the girl's lunar magic fully, even sooner than I anticipated. But no matter. You cannot wield such power without guidance. You cannot survive it. She raised her hands again. Kaelin shifted fully this time. The transformation tore through him like a storm breaking free, bones reshaping, muscles twisting, silver fur erupting from skin, and when he stood before me, a massive silver wolf with golden eyes burning like molten suns, he let out a roar so powerful the trees bowed, their branches cracking as the shockwave rolled through the clearing. The battle began. Kaelin lunged at Selentra, fangs flashing, claws shredding through her conjured barriers of sickly green energy, each impact sending sparks of magic cascading across the night sky, like strange, violent stars, and I, still reeling from the shield, summoned everything inside me, every scrap of fear, defiance, lingering hope, and pushed my magic outward again, coaxing it into shape, not as a shield this time, but as a force, a weapon, a surge of lunar energy that burst from my fingertips like a river forged of moonlight. Selentra's eyes widened. "Impossible!" She barely had time to form the word before the blast hit her, sending her spiraling backward with a cry that echoed through the trees like a wounded bird. Kaelin darted after her, moving with lethal grace, but Selentra slammed a hand into the ground, sending a wave of corrupt magic spiraling outward in a circle that cracked the earth beneath us. The ground split open. Kaelin fell. My heart seized. "Kaelin!" He caught the edge of the crevice with a clawed hand, his massive wolf body dangling over a pit that seemed bottomless, shadows deeper than death yawning hungrily beneath him. And I ran toward him, ignoring Selentra's taunting laughter, ignoring the pain lancing down my spine, ignoring the way the bond tried to pulse him upward with its own frantic panic. I reached the edge, falling to my knees, grabbing fistfuls of fur, desperately trying to pull him upward, though he was enormous and heavy, and the ground shook violently every time Salentra summoned another spell. "Let him fall," Salentra sang behind me, her voice a venomous lullaby. "His death will break your bond and free your power. You were always meant to belong to the moon, not to a king." "I belong to myself," I screamed, and something primal broke loose inside me. Something deeper than fear and stronger than destiny. A flame igniting in the depths of my soul. And silver fire erupted from my hands, flowing into Kalen, reinforcing his strength through the bond. His eyes, still gold, still bright, still unbroken, locked onto mine. Together, we pushed. Together, we rose. Kalen leapt from the crevice with a massive surge of power, tackling me to safety as the ground crumbled behind us, the pit swallowing itself in a shuddering collapse, and for a moment, he stood protectively over me, silver fur bristling, fangs bared, golden eyes burning like suns forged from fury. Salentra's smile faded. "You cannot win," she hissed. "I command the moon. I command fate." "No," I said, rising to my feet as Kalen shifted back beside me, breathing hard, trembling with exertion. "You only think you do." And finally, I understood what my family had died protecting, what the moon bond rituals had corrupted, what Salentra and Vasker had sought to control. The moon touched were never meant to be bound. We were meant to choose. I raised my hands, not with fear now, not with desperation, but with purpose. Quiet, burning, fierce. And instead of calling on the bond or my panic, or the chaos raging through my heart, I reached inward, deeper, into the part of myself I had always been afraid to see. My magic answered. Not violently, not chaotically, but softly, warmly, like moonlight on skin after a long night of storms. And I understood. Salentra lifted her hands to strike me down, but I had already summoned the magic, and when I released it, moonlight poured from me in a wave so bright, so pure, so overwhelming that the forest fell silent. The leaves stilled, the wind stopped, and even Kalen's breath caught in reverent awe. The light struck Salentra. She screamed, not in pain, but in fear. The fear of someone whose lies were burning away, whose stolen power was being peeled from her like rotting cloth. The green fire sputtered, the shadows fled, her illusions shattered, and beneath them she withered, her true age revealed, her stolen youth crumpling like parchment in flame. "The moon should have been mine," she gasped. "It never belonged to you," I whispered. With one final burst of moonlight, Salentra fell. Silence swept through the night like a gentle hand smoothing the wrinkles from a troubled face. Kalen's breathing slowly steadied beside me, his skin shimmering faintly with the remnants of his transformation, and when he turned to me, his expression was a storm of emotion. Relief, awe, pride, disbelief, fear, longing, all tangled together as if he were trying to comprehend how in a single night I had gone from a terrified stranger to someone who stood beside him against a darkness even he had feared. "You saved us," he said, voice quiet, rough, almost reverent. "We saved each other," I corrected. The bond pulsed softly between us, no longer frantic, no longer screaming, but calm, steady, warm. Kalen stepped closer, slowly, giving me every chance to step back, and when he reached up to brush a strand of my long silver hair from my cheek, he did it gently, as if touching something fragile and sacred. "You know," he murmured, "the bond doesn't have to define us. We can choose what it means. We can choose everything. I swallowed. The night breathed. The forest listened. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear in the bond. I felt possibility. I choose, I said softly, taking his hand, to stay. His breath shuddered. His forehead rested lightly against mine. And in that quiet, delicate moment, the moment when two lives shaped by pain and power finally aligned not because of destiny, but because of shared choice, I understood something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Freedom is not the absence of ties. Freedom is choosing the ones you hold. In the days that followed, Vasker fell, the clans united, and the truth of Selentra's conspiracy spread like dawn across a world long trapped in shadow. My name, once whispered as a warning or a stain, was reclaimed with honor, not because I wielded power, but because I had survived long enough to understand it. Kaelin stood before his people, not just as their alpha king, but as a leader who had finally found balance through partnership, trust, and the bond we had reforged on our own terms. And me? I stood beside him, not as a vessel, not as a pawn, but as myself, the moon touched, the survivor, the woman who chose her own fate. And as the moon rose above Silverwood Valley on the night of our first council, its silver glow washing over the world like a blessing instead of a threat, I felt a quiet peace settle into my bones, a peace earned through fire and fear and love and loss. And I knew that the story, our story, was only beginning. But for now, this is where I leave you, with a moonlit world reborn, with a bond remade by choice, with two souls standing hand in hand at the beginning of a future forged from everything they had endured. And with one lingering question, whispered gently into the night like a final breath. What destiny will you choose when the moon calls your name? The first light of dawn crept over Silverwood Valley like a cautious whisper, brushing the treetops with gold and silver, soft enough not to disturb the stillness, yet insistent enough to announce a new day. I stood atop the balcony of Kaelin's hall, watching the forest stretch endlessly below me, the moon's remnants still glowing faintly in the fading shadows, lingering like a blessing or a reminder of the night that had changed everything. Kaelin had risen hours before me, as always, moving through the halls with a quiet efficiency that reminded me simultaneously of a king and a predator, his presence commanding even the sun to respect its place in the sky. I had spent the early hours following him in silence, observing the way he interacted with his people, not as a ruler demanding fear or devotion, but as someone who held responsibility with measured strength, an authority tempered by care and understanding. It was a contrast to the terror I had once faced under Vasker and Selentra, and yet, seeing him this way, I realized how much more dangerous he could be if provoked. The bond between us had quieted overnight. Not gone, not dormant, but no longer a frantic, thrumming force that demanded instinctual reactions. It pulsed beneath my skin like a slow tide, subtle, intimate, a reminder that I was tethered to Kaelin in ways I had never imagined, and yet that tether no longer felt like a chain. I could feel his presence even when he was miles away, and for the first time, it was not frightening. Lyria! Kaelin's voice called from behind me, low and warm, carrying across the balcony like smoke curling around the edges of fire. I turned, meeting his golden gaze as he approached, cloak brushing against the stone railing. Even in the soft dawn, he radiated the quiet intensity that had defined him since the first moment we had met in the clearing. "You're awake," I said softly, my voice almost hesitant, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace we had claimed. "I've been awake for hours," he replied, sliding beside me without hesitation. A predator and protector merged into one effortless motion. Watching, listening, ensuring that the valley is safe. His gaze shifted toward the forest, noting the subtle movements in the undergrowth, the early chirps of birds that had survived the chaos of the previous night. They will not return so soon. Vasker's fall was thorough, but there are always remnants, hidden claws, waiting for opportunity. I nodded, a knot tightening in my stomach. Even with Salentra gone and Vasker defeated, I understood that peace was not permanence. There were always those who sought power, who would use fear and magic to bend the world to their will. But standing next to Kaelin, I felt as though we had a chance to face them together, not as prey and protector, but as equals bound by choice, not destiny. The sun continued its slow climb, spilling across the balcony in warmth that contrasted sharply with the cool, silver energy of the bond still lingering in me. I reached out, letting my fingers brush against Kaelin's, feeling the familiar pulse of connection. He didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he mirrored me, a silent affirmation that neither of us would try to deny the tie that had formed in the crucible of desperation and fear. "We need to begin rebuilding," I said, finally breaking the silence, my voice steadier than I had expected. "Not just the valley, not just the clans, but the trust between them. They need to see that the moon-touched can choose their own path without fear, without being used as pawns." Kaelin's expression softened, and for the first time in days, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "You've already begun that," he said, his golden gaze meeting mine. "By surviving, by standing against Salentra and Vasker when all hope seemed lost. Your people will follow your example, just as mine have begun to." We descended the balcony, moving into the courtyard where the first signs of life were returning. Soldiers and villagers alike emerged from the surrounding woods, cautious yet curious, scanning the ruins of what had been a battlefield hours before. I could see the fatigue etched into their expressions, but also relief. Relief that the reign of terror had ended. Relief that someone strong enough to protect them now stood at the helm. Kaelin's presence commanded respect naturally. I watched as whispers ran through the crowd, awe and hope intertwined in the same breath. "You're too kind," I murmured, glancing up at him as we walked side by side. I didn't feel like a hero last night. I felt terrified, helpless, reckless. I was lucky you were there. Kaelin chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made the air vibrate gently. "You were never helpless," he said, eyes softening. "You made choices. Brave, intelligent choices. Without you, I would not have been able to stop her. You saved more than just yourself. You saved me." His gaze sharpened, intensity rekindling as he added, "Do not mistake survival for luck, Lyria. Survival is earned, and you earned it." The compliment sent a strange flutter through me, a mix of pride, warmth, and something unspoken that hung between us like an invisible thread. I forced myself to look away, scanning the courtyard as villagers began cautiously approaching, offering food, water, and words of thanks. It felt surreal, this sudden shift from hunted to revered, from frightened captive to someone whose presence inspired hope. Over the following weeks, Silverwood Valley transformed. The remnants of Salentra's influence were purged, her enchantments undone, her followers either dispersed or captured. Kaelin oversaw the rebuilding with a careful hand, ensuring that the valley became not just a sanctuary for the clans, but a symbol of unity, a testament to what could be achieved when power was wielded responsibly. I moved beside him constantly, learning, observing, and most importantly, participating. The bond between us continued to pulse, steady now, a soft heartbeat that synchronized with my own. It was a constant presence, sometimes subtle, sometimes insistent, but always reminding me that we were connected, that our actions and emotions reverberated through each other. It was strange, intimate, terrifying, and comforting all at once. One evening, as the valley glowed beneath the silver sheen of a rising moon, Kaelin and I stood at the edge of the forest, overlooking a new council ground. Leaders from every clan had gathered, a tentative assembly of warriors, elders, and magic users. The air hummed with tension and cautious optimism. "They are watching," Kaelin said softly, leaning close enough that our shoulders brushed. His golden eyes were calm, but I could feel the subtle tension beneath the surface. "Some are curious, some are suspicious, some are already plotting how to challenge this new order." I nodded, feeling the familiar pull of the bond echo through me, lending strength where doubt had once lived. "Then we show them," I said, my voice firm. "We show them that choice is stronger than fear, and unity is stronger than domination." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and I felt a warmth spread through me. "We will," he said. "Together." The council meeting began with cautious greetings, with words measured and careful, but gradually, as stories of the battle spread, and as Kaelin and I demonstrated both power and restraint, the tension began to ease. Eyes that had been wary softened. Voices that had been sharp grew respectful. The moon touched, long feared as tools or weapons, were now seen as individuals capable of agency, courage, and wisdom. In the days that followed, I traveled alongside Kaelin through the valley, meeting leaders, negotiating peace between factions, and slowly learning the art of leadership. It was exhausting, humbling, and terrifying in ways that I could never have anticipated. But through it all, the bond between us provided an unspoken support, a thread of understanding that transcended words. One night, as we returned to the hall after a long day of councils, Kaelin paused on the balcony, looking out over the valley that was beginning to thrive once more. The moon hung low, silver and serene, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I joined him, leaning against the railing, feeling the cool stone beneath my hands and the warmth of his presence beside me. "You've grown stronger," he said, voice quiet, almost reverent. "Faster than I anticipated, and not just in power, in spirit." I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I had a good teacher," I replied lightly, though the bond thrummed subtly at his nearness, hinting at the depth of unspoken words. He chuckled softly, turning to face me fully. "I did not teach you everything," he said, eyes gleaming gold. "You taught yourself, and that is something no one can take from you." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the forest, of new growth, of hope. And for the first time since the night of Celentra's arrival, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. The bond between us was no longer a source of fear or confusion. It was a promise, a tether forged not by desperation, but by choice, by trust, by shared survival. Kaelin reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from my face, and I felt the bond respond, a soft pulse that hummed through both of us. "Whatever comes," he said, voice low, steady, and full of unshakable resolve, "we face it together. Always." I met his gaze, the golden intensity softened by warmth and understanding, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace. Always, I echoed, and the word resonated, carrying with it the weight of survival, of freedom, of choice. The valley stretched before us, bathed in the dual light of the moon and the rising sun, a world reborn from fire and fear, from loss and love. And as I stood beside Kaelin, feeling the steady pulse of our bond, I understood fully what it meant to be moon-touched, to wield power responsibly, to choose freely, to fight fiercely, and most importantly, to hold on to the ones you choose to protect. Not because destiny demands it, but because your heart does. The forest whispered around us, alive with promise and memory, the silver moon lingering above, a silent witness to the dawn of a new era. And in that quiet, luminous moment, I knew this was only the beginning. For as long as the moon called to the world, and as long as choice and courage endured, we would stand together. Two souls bound not by fate alone, but by trust, love, and the unshakable power of freedom. And the moon-touched girl, who had once been a frightened captive, now smiled, truly smiled, as she faced the horizon. Her story was far from over. She had chosen, and so had he. Together, they would shape what came next. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you feel? What surprised you? What moment struck you the most? Comment below and tell me your favorite part. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss future stories, chapters, or new worlds waiting to be explored. Your voice helps shape what comes next.